Let us pray. Lord, we are thankful for our city today. We ask you for your continued blessings and favor on us. Give this Board of Mayor and Commissioners wisdom and guidance as we strive to make the right decisions for our community. Bless our city manager, our staff and employees, and those in attendance today. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. And salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next term. Thanks, Mike. Motion to receive and file the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to receive and file the minutes of our regular meeting on January 23rd, 2020, and our recess meeting of January 24th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Hearings and reports. Commissioners?
Just want to welcome everybody today. I just want to say kudos to Ashland in Motion. It was a very successful Gravy Bowl last Saturday. It was, I think all of us made our way down there at one time or another, and it was a very successful event. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate all the people that were involved in that. You know, every little thing they do, it's great events, and Amanda's been to all of them.
Yes, I have.
Only as a volunteer, making sure everybody is okay.
Yeah, I've worked every one of them.
Yeah.
I made gravy this year, like for the
did?
first time ever, my public gravy debut. Yeah.
And where'd you finish?
And we didn't win.
You have any
But
left?
it was good.
I've
It
never
was good. We
tasted
made this
bad
really
gravy.
cool
I
thing
haven't
that
either,
was,
yeah.
What's
it
virtue
had
room after
tater tots, and then it had biscuits, and then tater tots, and then gravy, and bacon, and cheese.
We can overdo, you know.
Yeah, it was a little much.
Yeah. Okay.
Go big or go home, right?
Yeah. Anybody else? Pat, how you doing? Good.
Doing good.
Okay. City Manager?
For the sake of time, Mayor, we've got a couple of briefings coming up from both Strand and also the audit, so I've got nothing else to cover.
Okay, good deal. Who you want to?
If Mark Sneeve, if you could come up from Strand, and we've got a presentation also. Mark's here to give us an update on where we're at on the process for the improvement and potential expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. And Mark.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I do have a brief presentation. Might take just over 10 minutes to get through this.
It's important, Mark.
I want to leave time for questions and answers at the end. We're here today to talk to you about your wastewater treatment plant upgrade. It's a very important project that the city's initiated. And the next slide will show why the city is initiating this project. It's the last project in your long-term control plan, which was the abatement plan for your combined sewer overflows. The purpose of the project is to increase the treatment capacity at your wastewater plant, and because it's part of the long-term control plan, it's been bound as a commitment in your consent judgment, which is a judicial action saying that the city is going to follow through with the CSO plan that was submitted. The graphic on this slide shows the various projects that were in this combined sewer long-term control plan, and the three that aren't highlighted in blue represent this project. Improvements to the 10th Street pump station, the 26th Street pump station, and your wastewater treatment plant. In addition to complying with the CSO abatement plan, this project will address a 40-year-old asset of the city's. A lot of equipment and structures need attention from that. Also, we'll be looking ahead to regulations that will be in the near future requirements for the city and setting you up for success. Also looking at how we optimize efficiency, how we save power costs, and how we operate the facility in a most efficient manner moving forward. Next. So the engineering contract that you've entered into with Strand really has 4 distinct phases, and right now we're in the first phase, preliminary engineering. Once we're done with this phase, we'll go on to mine the rest of the details of the project and ultimately help the city get this work constructed. Next. We've assembled a project team for this assignment, and Strand Associates is the lead entity on the team. We're the prime consultant. We're going to do most of the work, although there's two specialty areas where we brought in experts to help with. Magna Consultants is an electrical and controls company. That's the role that they'll play. And Wood is a company that specializes in working in floodplains and doing geotechnical explorations. So there are two sub-consultants to our team. Next. So there are 16 tasks in the preliminary design effort that we're in today. And I won't bore you by going through the details of these 16 tasks, but the intent of these is to make decisions early in the project that maximize the return on investment that the city will receive. A couple that I will highlight: the treatment plant will have to acquire, or the city will have to acquire some property to construct the new facilities. That's a very early action step. Depending on what property is acquired, dictates what the future project looks like. We're dealing with some floodplain issues with this project, and working with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, is a threshold we have to cross early in the project to make sure they're on board with the new facilities. A few others include selecting the ultimate peak flow and storage capacity within the facilities, and ultimately will culminate into a basis of a design report with a preliminary set of drawings, a cost opinion that will help the city to obtain and pursue funding for the work. So a lot is going on in this first stage, and we'll go on to the next slide. This is a schedule that shows the project has about 6 years to be constructed before your deadline, and it's about a 5-year project. So the good news is the city has started this early enough to have a little float at the end of the project schedule. If something does go wrong or causes anything to happen in the beginning of the project, you'll still be successful at the end because of that cushion at the end of the project. We're about a quarter of the way through this preliminary engineering phase, the first step, and today I'm just going to go through kind of some of the progress we've made on some of those 16 tasks. Next. Before we get there, let's just kind of put the cost of the project into perspective. This is probably going to be the single largest capital project that the city has undertaken. By the time you actually construct this, it's going to be somewhere between $25 and $35 million capital project. We recognize the significance of that. Back in 2010, the city adopted an ordinance to create what's called a CSO surcharge. And the revenue from that ordinance is what's going to pay for all of the past projects that we've talked about in the long-term control plan, as well as this project. So the original ordinance had a rate that went into effect in 2010, and there was an update to that rate in 2015. And the intent is that that surcharge stays in effect until all of the improvements have been paid and any debt that's encumbered is retired. So right now, the direction of financing for the project would be to work with the state Division of Water and Kentucky Infrastructure Authority to take out a loan through the State Revolving Fund Loan Program. It's a loan program that's intended for use for these sort of clean water projects like this. It's got a subsidized interest rate, about a little less than 2% right now, and it's a 20-year loan term. So that's the direction for financing that's been laid out for this project. Next, I'll go through just a couple of activities that we've been working on. Surveying. The commission is aware that there was an agreement required by AK Steel to access their property. That was put into place early in January. Good news is we're already done with the survey. We jumped right on that because it's a threshold task for us. We've been working to develop some equipment reviews. The treatment staff is going to have equipment they've never seen before. And we want to educate them on what some of the options are early in the process so that their opinion is valued in the final project. So we're about 80% done with that effort at this point. Next. The next, now that we have access to AK Steel property, we're going to go in and do some wetlands and an environmental review, as well as some geotechnical borings to get some baseline information. That'll be probably by the next time I visit with the commission, that'll have occurred. And now that we have survey data, we can begin the floodplain evaluation that I've mentioned. Next. We're working on a liquid hauled waste study. Right now, the city receives a significant amount of revenue from accepting liquid hauled waste. And our study that we're doing right now is going to look at how we can do that more efficiently, perhaps attract additional hauled waste customers, and to do it in a fashion that isn't, during the 2 years of construction at the treatment plant, isn't going to limit the revenue stream of hauled waste. Your existing treatment plant was constructed nearly 40 years ago, and the plant needs assessment has been started. We've identified a number of electrical, structural, and mechanical improvements that will be recommended to be addressed within the project. The control panel there looks like something from one of the Apollo missions from the 60s, and really, it's that old, and it really needs to be updated. That's just an example of some of the antiquated components in the treatment plant. Next. The treatment plant is the single largest use of power for the city of Ashland, and power consumption needs to be addressed in this project. Anything we could do to make it more efficient, use less energy, is going to save money in perpetuity for the city, and that's the focus of the energy optimization study. Nutrient removal study is really important because that's a future permit limit that will be imposed by the state. I can't tell you if that'll be in the next year, the next 5 years, but I'll tell you it's likely to be before the next 10 years. So we don't want to build a new and improved facility that has to be upgraded yet again when that limit comes in. So we're going to evaluate strategies to implement that nutrient removal into this project if the city commissions that. Finally, funding for this project is something we've already talked a little bit about. In December, we updated your project profile, and we have to do that each December as we advance towards taking the loan out to complete the work. And we're also going to consider alternate funding sources and the potential to attract any grants that might help to offset the cost. If we look into the future, we're going to make, by the time I present next to the commission, we'll have made a lot of progress on those tasks. And some additional ones, I wanted to draw your attention to peak flow selection. Now that most of the long-term control plan projects have been implemented, the city's been capturing data from the benefit of those projects. Now that we have real data after the completion of those, we're going to use that real data to make sure that we properly size the improvements to the treatment plant. We don't want it to be bigger than it needs to be. We don't want it to be smaller. So that's an important task that will begin now that we have all of 2019 data. There's going to be some pilot testing to test out some different technologies that the city's not familiar with, but also to demonstrate the effectiveness of those technologies before selecting the proper one to advance into design. And the last I'll point out is laying out the site for property acquisition needs. This is, again, a kind of a threshold task that has to happen early in this design phase so that we know with confidence we can design facilities on property that the city owns. And with that, I'll entertain any questions anybody has.
Let me ask this, Mr. Steve, because we've talked about it every term I've ever been here as a commissioner or otherwise. I was on a commission when we did, the last major improvement up there. The sludge, the factor based on this. So I'm assuming that our expanding our operation and not making it too big, but we're getting a better size for our region and all that. Is it going to produce a considerable amount more? Is there something in the process that you actually make less sludge, or is it you're going to get what you get no matter what because you're treating all that? Okay.
Yeah.
And my second question to that is anywhere able to sell their sludge as opposed to having to pay to have it hauled off all the time?
Those are great questions. The sludge generation from the treatment plant will be about the same as it is today, maybe just a little bit more because we're going to capture more of the combined sewage and treat it. But it's probably not going to vary by more than 10% from what you receive today.
Huh.
Part of the strategy in the project is to replace some antiquated and worn-out equipment that currently takes your liquid sludge and makes it into a dewatered product. That's a component of the project. And then the question about is there an opportunity to make a beneficial product that could be sold? That is a technology that has been implemented at the municipal treatment level. We can certainly weigh the merits of that. It's a tremendous investment, but that investment pays dividends by receiving a revenue stream for getting rid of your sludge product. An example, I'm from Louisville, and Louisville's sewer entity implemented a very expensive process to create a dried sludge fertilizer product. It's very successful, but had a very short life. After about 15 years, all of the investment that they had made has been worn out, and they're addressing that again. Those are some of the limitations. You can invest a little up front, create a revenue stream, but it's probably going to need a reinvestment over time as well.
Well, that kind of answers that part. Mr. Grubb, is it possible you can pull off the top of your head how much we pay a month for sludge removal? That's okay. 175 over the year. Well, that's not cheap. I mean, that's. So you touched briefly on a water, I guess water soluble, whatever, instead of a dry sludge or what. Our system will be doing that. So what would that be? Just to put in the river at a level that is acceptable by the federal government?
So let me answer that question by explaining just a real fundamental aspect of wastewater treatment. When all the wastewater comes into the treatment plant, it goes out in two different ways. One is to the river as a treated effluent. You have very strict guidelines for what that needs to be. The other is a sludge product that goes out usually in a sludge truck. There are technologies that you could, if you had access to land, you could liquid land apply sludge. The topography in eastern Kentucky is not very favorable for that. So you could haul your sludge off as a liquid. There'd be a lot of sludge trucks. Most applications would dewater that, get rid of most of the liquid, and haul off fewer trucks of dewatered sludge. I would envision that the project will recommend continuing to dewater the sludge, but hauling it off in liquid might be an opportunity if somebody was willing to take it and treat it for you. These are some really great questions because the preliminary engineering phase of the project that we're in is the time to get answers to all these so that the rest of the project's defined.
You know, I was just thinking 2025, and maybe there have been advancements that either reduce the amount of dry sludge and increase the ability to put more in the river at an acceptable rate, you know, what goes in. I can remember 30, 40 years ago when we did a big overhaul up there that the experts that were in, similar to yourself, said you could actually drink what we were putting in the river. No, you wouldn't want to have regular, you know, you wouldn't have for dinner or anything, but it was so acceptable that it would not harm you. And I don't know how true that was. None of us ran up there to get a glass
Test that theory.
or anything. I've taken enough of that tough stuff to drink. But so what we're going to be putting in is going to far exceed what is required by the federal government to go in our river.
Yeah, your liquid end product that goes to the river will be better than it is today because of the future nutrient requirements, but I still wouldn't drink it.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't. But just as an aside, they, for instance, the police department has this program going that if you're a drug user or pills, whatever it is, prescriptions you shouldn't have, whatever, they have a grace period. You bring it in, and we don't ask a lot of questions. We just get it. And I'm not sure what we do with it, but A lot of times they tell us, you know, as residents, don't flush any down your toilet or anything. Obviously, we would need something in this plant, which we may already have, to address some kind of components that are harder to treat. So is that a big deal in cities and big cities? I mean, how about the hospital, you know, and what they, you know, discharge, you know, on a regular basis?
You're saying, how do you eliminate pharmaceuticals from the wastewater?
Well, no, I don't think we can.
Well, there's talk, am I wrong, that this is possibly something that they're looking at in the future?
So yes, to both questions. It's really important to have the
How you
take-back
enforce it,
programs.
though.
Right.
You know, especially, I mean, you see all these movies, the first thing they do, and the police knock on the door, they flush everything down the toilet, so that's gonna happen no matter
Well, I mean,
what, I'm sure.
I think the
As a
challenge
convenience.
is treating it, to remove it so that it doesn't continue to cycle.
The pharmaceuticals and personal care products are lumped into a term that US EPA is calling pollutants of emerging concern. And we don't know enough science-wise yet to develop limits, but I could envision in 20 to 30 years, they will ask dischargers to pay attention to certain products that might not be fully treated through the biological process at a treatment plant. That is it is a concern. I don't think it's an immediate concern, but with more science and more time, we're going to be looking at some of those compounds.
Because there is reports that say there's a significant amount of pharmaceuticals in our existing water systems. And like you said, they don't know how that really impacts us when we consume it second, third, fourth, fifth time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? Mr. Sneed? Thank you, it's very enlightening and organized, we appreciate that, because we're pretty much lay
Well,
people in this.
I do have one more question. You mentioned property acquisition. So you'll be giving us an idea of how much space you need so we can make some decisions on that?
Correct. Yeah, we'll be advising the city on the property limits of acquisition. And some of that has to do with the layout and the FEMA floodplain work, which is why those are early tasks.
So if there is an issue with acquisition, you can design on the existing site? I think I was told that there was options where if we weren't capable of, we could.
I think that would be very difficult.
Okay.
I won't say no, but I think it'd be very challenging.
So we need to do our best to get that, otherwise this may be a moot point.
Could be a very expensive project. Yes.
We have the right of condemnation for public purposes if necessary. You obviously don't want to
No.
go that route if you don't have to, but
No.
Yeah.
One other point of emphasis is we are, what we're putting into the river now does meet all state and federal standards.
Yeah,
So everything that Mark has said about improvements to make us more efficient, cost-effective, and dealing with future requirements, but we are meeting state and federal standards now, even with the challenges that we have down there with the age of our system.
Correct.
I want to emphasize that.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Anthony Workman with Kelly Galloway. Important information. Welcome, glad to have you.
Glad to be here. I want to start off by thanking the Commission for the opportunity to complete the audit for this past several years, I guess, and appreciate the Finance Department and all departments we deal with in completing it.
Everybody was highly cooperative, I'm sure.
They were,
And
definitely.
And they do.
And everybody was highly knowledgeable as far as being able to help us
We're glad to hear that.
obtain all the information we require. So I don't know if everybody has their book in front of them today. It's about 100 pages long. I will not go through every single page. I'm just going to try to hit the high points. So if you feel like I rushed through it or anything, just feel free to interrupt me.
Okay.
I'll answer any question that I can. I'd like to start off with our independent auditor's report, which is about, you flip over 4 pages in. It states that we have audited the accompanying financial statements of the City of Ashland as of June 30th, 2019, and that management is responsible for the preparation of these statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles in the United States, and our responsibility is to express an opinion on these statements. And our opinion is at the bottom of the page. It says, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, business type activities, each major fund of the city of Ashland as of June 30th, 2019. It's what's called an unmodified opinion or a clean audit opinion. First section I'll just briefly mention is over on page 4, which is just 2 pages over, the management discussion and analysis. This section is prepared by the finance department once all the statements are compiled. That provides an analysis on the statements, provides some budgetary comparisons, some comparisons to prior year. I won't go through this. I just want to briefly mention it to you that it is useful to read as you go through it. It provides some basic information. Our responsibility for this is basically just make sure it's not misleading and it agrees with the other information presented in the financials. So the statement that I'll first go over is on page 17 and 18. You have to turn your book if you do have it there. It's a statement of net positions. This provides pretty much a balance sheet. If you were a company, you think of it as the city's balance sheet as of June 30th. And it's broken down into governmental activities and business type activities. And the business type activities is mostly the utility fund, but does include the recreation fund, the cemetery fund, the bus system as well. On page 18, at the bottom of the page, you'll see the city ended the year with net position of $48 million as of June 30th. And the major liability of the city and most of municipalities in the area, if you look at about the middle of the page for liabilities, net OPEB liabilities and net pension liabilities. These are the retirement liabilities for the county retirement and for the healthcare system. As you see, if you add those together, it's about $68 million, $68.5 million. Most of that is the county retirement. I believe it's approximately $60 million. And I think the other $8.5 million is the police and fire pension liability and the utility pension liability combined, about $8.5 million at the end of the year. Now, as you know, I'm sure you're aware, the state's been increasing those retirement rates every year to try to cover that shortage. And next year, I just kind of looked it up this morning, for the police and fire, the city will be paying 44% starting 7/1.
Well, what's our percentage now?
At the end of 19, it was 35% for the police and fire. It went up for the fiscal year 20 as well, probably another 4 or 5%. I'm not sure if you know the top of your head. But it's going up another 5% for next year for them. So 44% is what will be contributed for that. And for the other employees, it's going to approximately 27%. So I think the limit on that every year is a 12% increase. They can't increase the rate more than 12% a year. And they're trying to cover that shortfall. So,
Which is a reminder, that was a 10-year, what the state had set that 12% for 10 years, which was illogical to what I understood they needed.
yeah. Well, it definitely trying to not put too much of a burden on these local municipalities, because if you look at some smaller cities, it is more difficult to increase tax rates to be able to cover those costs. So the statement that may most interest the commission is over on page 22. The statement of revenues and expenditures. It's for each governmental fund. You see across the top, you probably recognize the titles: general fund, your tax increment finance fund for the year. This is presented on a basis, it's pretty much budgeted how revenues and expenditures are budgeted during the year. If you look from 3 items from the bottom, over on the far right, you'll see there was a total decrease of about $2 million in governmental fund balance at the end of the year. The majority of that is due to the general fund and the tax increment finance fund. The general fund had a decrease of $700,000. Majority of that is health costs. The city's health plan, I think, had an increase of $2 million in health claims between 18 and 19. I'm not sure how this year, it looks so far for this year, but the general fund does bear the brunt of those.
Well, that was higher than I think even what we had discussed previously, which we were thinking it was like 1.7. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I may be rounding up. Yeah.
Okay.
1.8, 1.9. I'm maybe rounding up a little bit too much. I do apologize for that. But the general fund does bear the brunt of that cost.
Okay.
The tax increment finance fund, it basically decreased for the remainder of that payment to the developer, the $1.3 million, and the payment for the first payment on debt service associated with that. So, but that is the final, my understanding, the final payment for the developer of the hotel. So, I'm just kind of going to get back on page 36. I won't go through each one of these. This starts the footnotes to the financials that details the accounting policies that's used by the city, provides some other information for line items, and I apologize if you haven't got there yet. And it runs from pages 36, I think, to 68. It provides plenty of information. I'm only going to point out a couple of these that may be of interest. I think on page 46, the city's capital assets and property and equipment that's owned at the end of the year. There's a schedule provided here that provides all the activity broken down by the governmental activities and the business type activities. During the year, you'll see the business type activities overall, it has a $7.4 million addition in total. Most of that has to deal with the Mill Street building and the CSO project that has been discussed previously. For the governmental activities, it was $3 million in purchases. Most of it had to deal with infrastructure, road improvements, sidewalks, that nature. The building on the 1401 Winchester is also included in the additions for this year, recording at the fair value of that building, or what was the anticipated fair value of that building. Over on the next page begins discussion of the retirement plans and the health care post-employment benefit plans. I'm not going to go through this, but this will, footnotes 7 and 8, I think it's about 13 pages long. That'll provide you all the information I think you'd probably want to know on those plans. Allocation of investments, the discount rates, the assumptions used to calculate those liabilities. It is a lot of information. It is all required, and sometimes I can personally think it's kind of overkill, maybe for everybody, but it is required information that has to be presented. I will point out on page 60, long-term obligations, the city's debt as of the end of the year. There was no new debt issued during the year for either utility or just general long-term debt, but there was about $1.8 million paid down in principal payments. Principal payments actually made during the year. So, and following the two schedules on pages 60 and 61 does detail for each outstanding obligation the payment schedules for each one of those over the following 4 or 5 pages. Now, on page 68, I'll point this out since we mentioned the health care claims. It's under footnote 14. It's labeled risk management. You'll see in the middle of the page, there's the changes in fund claims liability during the year for the past 2 years, for 18 and 19. If you look at the second column, that current year claims for 2018 was $4.5 million. For 2019, it was $6.4 million. If you look at it on an actual payment basis, an actual what was paid between the 2 years, there's 4.7 paid in 2018 and $6 million paid in 2019 on what was actually paid out. So I think everybody can agree healthcare costs have been increasing
We need to
across the board.
We need to, I think, consider adding commissioners to the insurance committee. I think with this kind of cost coming up, I'm not sure that we're fully aware until it's maybe too late of the full scale and scope of this issue. That's a pretty sharp increase in a year. And I feel like since we're the fiduciary body for the city, it would probably be important that we be a part of that, just like we are with the Capital Projects Committee. I don't know how you all feel about this, but a $2 million increase is a lot of money. And correct me if I'm wrong, healthcare costs overall, is it 8% increase?
I can't say for sure. You're thinking nationwide,
Right.
I can't say for sure. Now the city is self-funded. That's
Right.
That's kind of the issue there. So it really depends on the health of the employees and the families and what's going on a year-to-year basis. And that is hard to budget for.
Absolutely.
Very hard to budget for.
Everybody, I think every business in the private sector is having the same challenges,
yeah.
but they all are having to adapt, as we, I think, at
Yeah.
this point may need to consider that.
Yeah, businesses adapt,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure, to stay in business. Yeah.
absolutely.
We, was there a rash of severe illnesses, long-term, more than we've been used to? Do you know that too, Mr. Workman? I'd look at my finance people, but.
I was gonna say, the details would probably have to come from the finance department at this point.
That's what there's an increase in losses and major claims this year, a steep increase over the last couple of years.
Fiscal year 20 is trending higher than fiscal year 19 at this point.
So we're looking even more than what we,
What do you attribute that to? What,
Our 5-year average, though, on just health claims, not HRA or anything, is 4.6 million. So historically, we've had some good
good years. But right now, we're in a rash of dramatic increases.
Yeah, Samantha and I met with MedBen, and their projections for the year are more than this year, $100,000.
Is any of that, I know it's a lot of money, so is any of that, where we worked hard on getting our people to go to outreach clinics and all instead of emergency room all the time, and was that working some? Is that part of it?
It's only a ebb and flow.
We've had some people, obviously, probably up to about 10 people that's had some problems. That's gotten sick. It's not the first time that we've experienced these increases. But it is a little concerning to us, this second year in a row that we're trying to be above and beyond required. Someone asked a question earlier. Medical inflation for 19 is about 4%. The core inflation is about 2%.
So you're seeing a 4% increase nationwide in medical costs?
Is it possible that we're trending up in 2020 because the same people who were having problems in 2019 are still dealing with those? Or are these? Okay.
But MedBen did say we did make some adjustments to our plan where, with new hires, their spouse had to take their insurance first. And it was the first time in 5 years that employee claims were actually higher than spousal claims. So we could actually see the benefit of that.
That's a good change. Good.
Yeah, well, that's a very reasonable implementation.
Yeah,
I know we-
FedEx just did that this year.
We talked about
Yeah.
that budget time. I know there are some organizations or governmental that, they're always afraid to monkey with that, but if your spouse has good insurance, then the taxpayer shouldn't be paying
Exactly.
all the time. And just like a lot of our businesses that I know of in town, they have no insurance coverage now or minimal, when they used to be at least 50% or even 100%, and they were glad to do that, but they couldn't do it anymore. I don't see the city operating any differently, and we are dealing with sacred tax money, and it's just that our insurance committee, and I certainly agree with Commissioner, we need to get our heads together and determine a very fair plan that is fair to the taxpayers in general too. That we don't necessarily exceed other businesses in Ashland.
Right.
The city shouldn't be the premier. It's nice if we are, and it's wonderful. And we
you
all
can-
feel good about it, but it isn't the reasonable thing to do.
And you can do different things. It doesn't always necessarily mean a premium increase or a dramatic change to the plan, but it just even like having somebody come in and give us an analysis of our insurance to give us some advice as to how we move forward, because I don't think any of us up here are experts by any stretch, but back to the mayor's point, we just need to make sure we're doing the best we can with the money we do have.
And I think we have. I think you guys have
Some guidance, as you
Yeah, they
mentioned,
do.
as you mentioned,
And
yeah.
just an important thing to remember as well. Yes, we are trying to be as good of stewards with taxpayer money as we possibly can, and what I'm getting ready to say is going to sound like I'm not trying to do that. But we recently this year had to raise wages to compete with Walmart. And part of what the benefit to being here is a decent insurance policy.
Oh, I don't think anybody here is
And-
saying that.
And there's a fine line in that, I realize that, but we have to keep that in mind as well.
I think mainly my point is that just so that we're kept in the loop as these challenges arise, so we maybe don't know just at maybe budget time or audit time that we have overages. I think for us, it's more of a situational awareness kind of deal versus maybe tinkering with the system, but I don't think it would hurt for us to analyze every aspect of our insurance.
I agree. Yes, sir.
I believe one of the last statements I'll show you, if you skip all the way over to page 81, it is a budget to actual comparison schedule for the general fund. It breaks down the revenues by source or by type, and the expenditures also by department and line items between departments. If you happen to make it over there, over at the bottom of the page, you'll see total revenues had actually exceeded budget, and what was actually budgeted by $520,000. And the majority of that was in the occupational license fees, the payroll tax, and of that nature. Now, those are it's sometimes a timing on those fees on when they're actually paid by the local businesses. So, as far as findings are concerned, over on page 94, we detail those out. There were only three. 94, sorry. I don't mean to, like I said, I don't mean to rush through this, but at the top of the page, there were three. One was on competitive bidding. This one dealt with diving services to remove debris from the water intake at the treatment plant. They ended up exceeding, I think, overall the $20,000 threshold required by policy, and those technically should have been bid out at that before that point. So that's the first item. The second item was on inventory issues. We noted when we performed an inventory observation for the utility fund and the parts inventory, there were several errors while we were out there that had to be corrected, and I believe on at the garage, there were several errors down there as well that overall led to an increase, stuff that hadn't been counted, and that had to end up being added to the city's financials.
And I guess we've cleared those up.
Yes, and
On the first one, on the miscounted items, there's some personnel changes, also looking at potential hardware or software solutions and utilities, looking at different software there. And then that $70,000 on the bus system, as Mr. Workman said, was a residual from previous when we did the 100% inventories. When we actually got the 100% inventories completed this summer, we think we've got our arms around that. We're doing 100% quarterly inventory at the garage, which includes a check from finance.
And the last item is over on page 95, had to deal with pay rates. We just noted a few individuals that were being paid outside the adopted pay scale. And my understanding is either those have been corrected or in process of being corrected now. That's my understanding on those. So I think it's 5 or 6 overall,
So we, as far as taking care of employees not being compensated, we are in the middle of getting that remedied.
I take exception to one of these in that we hired somebody on a part-time basis.
Okay.
And we're paying that individual within the hourly rate of that scale. And per the FLSA,
So they were on the part-time basis?
Hired them on a part-time basis. We're giving them an hourly rate that's within that pay band. And so I don't think there's an issue
Don't
with
think there's
that.
an issue with that? Okay. Well, I mean, that is something to,
And it was an intentional part-time hire.
okay. So,
But it is a finding.
yeah, it's included, it's kind of lumped all in here together with the others, so, yeah, we'll have to definitely consider that next year, so. But those are the 3 items we had. I mean, and those is clean as, and that's all I really have to discuss, unless you have any other questions or concerns, anything I can attempt to, answer for you.
So do you feel, as far as how the whole process went, it was pretty easy for you?
Oh,
Everybody-
as far as the audit is concerned?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Dealing with the finance department and their knowledge and just their help throughout the year makes, when you're looking at this size of a city, if you don't have a good finance department, it can be very difficult. So,
Thank you so much.
We feel the same
appreciate
way.
it. I do appreciate everybody's.
We count on them.
help. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Tony, Michelle, and all your staff, thank you.
Can we ask the finance department to speak? I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Tony, do you mind coming up? Just on financial position, so we're getting ready to go into budget soon. How do you feel we're doing as far as that's concerned? I mean, do you feel like,
We're in the process of starting the actual FY21 budget process. We're working on the personnel cost worksheets.
and do you feel good about our budget for next year, or based on financial position right now?
We've not really started looking or modeling the revenues, but I would anticipate if it's similar to last year, that we're looking at somewhat marginally flat revenues.
That's one of my concerns. We've had job loss announcements, and I'm worried about our potential moving forward on tax revenue. Obviously, that's one component of how we can do business.
Sure.
And is there any way we can kind of gauge the potential economic impact to our city?
I'm actually looking at that now. You actually can. There's a thing called RIMS modeling. It's a regional input multiplier that you can use to try to give you a guesstimation of what kind of impact jobs losses would be. I'm a little bit rusty since I've actually used that, but I am looking into it. We'll try to come up with something.
Because when we go into budget time, I think that would help us.
I would point out
Forecasting.
that anytime, finance, when we do a budget, we're very conservative
Sure.
on the revenue side of it.
Right.
So you really don't want to be just the opposite, because you end up being a little bit of trouble.
Absolutely, right.
Well, and we'll work closely by budget time with our largest employer, King's Daughters, who have already employed about 260 new nurses, which will have a positive impact on our revenue in the city, with a lot of doctors moving in also. So at budget time, we at least know at that point, because it's like a small business starting up when they get that many employees coming into.
And I was encouraged to see the occupational tax increase in the audit. I think
Yeah.
that's reassuring.
Yeah.
I just don't want to see a negative trend moving forward, and if that's the case, then we've got to be judicious about how we spend.
Yeah, sure. Normally each year, you'll see a little bit of spike in the occupational license fee, and that's normally due from employers giving their employees COLA.
And I guess one more question, as far as back taxes and things like that, like fees for like our code enforcement fines and stuff like that, are we,
Finance is coordinating with legal, and we're very aggressively going after any delinquent accounts.
how much are we thinking is out there on the delinquent taxes
On property
side?
tax, I think there's about 2 million. A portion of that, a large portion of that is the school.
And then what about our code enforcement fines and stuff?
Code enforcement, I probably have to defer to Mr. Pullum if he's here, but I think there might be like 3 million, maybe, possibly, but
So we have $5 million in potential revenue
Yeah.
we could capture.
Yeah. 3 million there.
3.3.
Yeah. Well, delinquent taxes should mean something to every taxpayer that's paying,
Sure.
And if we're still delinquent 2 million, and I know that Mr. Moore and in his office and Mr. Wheeler are on it and working hard on it. It's a arduous task because, we have so many properties that absentee owners, inheritance properties, nobody wants to fool with, do anything. And we have to go by legal system of how we, wage.
Go about it.
Wage
Yeah.
action on them, and Mr. Pullum and his staff have done an admirable job over the last year of identifying properties that we could move on, and we have.
So that's going to keep you busy for a while, it sounds
Well,
like.
you have to be judicious because you can actually lose money pursuing taxes against properties that aren't going to generate the income to pay the tax debt and the costs of collection. So you have to use some discretion. You have to try and pick and choose, and that's what we've been trying to do. But I think we've been doing a pretty good job, especially enforcing the compliance on the occupational tax, and then trying to move forward on target the biggest property tax delinquencies, and also trying to target those where we feel like they can be collected.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I think we've had pretty much success, and again, Mr. Wheeler and Finance have been working hard on that.
Good.
And it's not a new revenue, it's money owed.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Grubb, just to clarify, just so that everybody who's here and who's watching is clear, you said 2 million, and most of that is the school. That is not $2 million that the school owes us. Most of that tax would go to the school because it's delinquent, correct?
That is
Okay.
correct.
About how much of that,
And I
Mr.
would,
Grubb?
probably
So 1.2 million
about
of the
1.2 million.
But so we could see,
800K to
so
the
we could
city.
see 800K.
Yes, but I would
I just
point
wanted to
out
make sure everybody
that
was clear
a
about
lot of
that.
A lot of that is within the last probably 3 years. If you look at a 10-year trend that finance monitors, we have a collection rate of probably like 99.2.
Yeah, it's really high.
98%. So a lot of those within a recent years, over the years, they smooth themselves out. We collect them.
But I think it sounds like there's still plenty of work to be done, though, on collection,
Absolutely.
always.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of work
Yes,
for
sir.
everybody.
Yes, sir.
Are we
Thank you.
seeing an increase from the hospital right now?
An increase in the payroll tax? No, not really. I mean, it's somewhat flat. I would have to double check that.
Well, you will,
Uh,
shortly.
I would say that the King's Daughters, they probably contribute about 30% of the payroll tax that we collect, about 30%. So by and far, they are the largest.
Contributor, yeah.
Sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Grubb.
Tony.
Yes, sir.
Anything else on finance, commissioners?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll take these home and study them a little bit. If we have more questions, we'll get a hold of Mr. Workman for sure. Thank you for being here today and going through it.
You draw the short straw, so.
Boss was out of town, I know that.
Yeah.
He plans that, At this point in our meetings, public participation, if there's someone in the audience who would like to address something not on our agenda, and it could easily happen, don't have much on here, limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, and now's the time to do that.
My name is Leva Pickard, and I live at 2615 Moore Street. And I'm here today to make a couple suggestions, a short quote, and to say thank you. Most of you know I've been up here several times with different issues going on with my son. James Kearns, he developed mentally delayed and a lot of mental illness and a lot of stuff going on. But I came today to say thank you. I don't know that Officer Lewis is here, but he did meet with Jimmy, and he did an amazing job. And him and Matt were able to really calm some things down with Jimmy and his wife that have been going on off and on for 3 years. And so we finally come to an end of that, and I wanted to say thank you. And also the police presence has been more on Pollard Road. And not only do they need it, but I know that hospice is there on the corner of Pollard and Blackburn. There's people going in and out of there all the time, of course, to take care of their loved ones. And so with the police presence there, it's made things calmer too. For the parking lot, they feel safer. The people on Pollard that were having issues are now safer. And there was a quote, and I'm just paraphrasing it, but this is what it said, and it summed up what Matt and what Officer Lewis was able to do. And it says, the index to character shows when people take care of people that can't fight back and people that can't give anything back to you, that can do nothing for you. And the commissioners have been great to be able to help and to do, every time we've come up, everybody's pitched in. I mean, one problem after the other. And Jack, I think it's Jack Hunter, helped so much with Jimmy.
He's back here in the back.
Yeah, I think he was just amazing.
He is
Scott-
amazing, doing a great job for us.
And Scott Neese was another one that just, and these are people that kicked it in. So this is my suggestion. Because there's been so many issues with Jimmy not being able to understand everything, and so many people have called me, we probably have, and I'm estimating probably 25% of people that would love to have somebody to go to. All of them can't come in. All of them can't write letters. All of them can't do the calling. So my suggestion is, and this came from several people, not just me, if we had a task force, and I know the commissioners can't do everything, but if we had a task force for people that are mentally ill, people that have developmentally delayed problems, people with physical and mental problems with dual diagnoses, how wonderful would that be? Because we've dealt with everything from stalking, going to court, not being able to figure out paperwork, not being able to know what to do, you know, the whole thing, the whole gamut. And so I feel like if we had that, it would be an amazing thing for the people in Ashland. I mean, you are taking great care of everybody, but this group sometimes falls through the crack because they aren't coming, they don't know what to say, and they're not going to call.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Pickard. That's an excellent recommendation.
So thank you all so much. That's really what I wanted to say.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And I want to also mention, I want to personally thank our police for their efforts. It kind of reminded me this past week of providing a police escort for the funeral procession for one of my coworkers who had passed away at FedEx. It means a lot to a grieving mother, and she reached out to me to express her thanks, and I think you may be hearing from her if you haven't already. But thank you, Chief. Meant a lot to her and her whole family. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I wasn't going to say this, but we may not get another chance to say something like this, but we haven't had a major water break this winter yet.
Stop.
I don't care what you're thinking out there. I don't care what you're thinking. You don't have an opportunity to make a statement like that very often. And I don't think we're going to have one, although it's going to be 19 tomorrow
Mark,
night.
my phone just went off.
Great
Mark, my
news.
phone just went off.
I said
There's-
major water break, which every year we've been here, folks. You get one, and then you hear another one happens, another one happens. And I'm hoping, Manager, that a lot of that's due to the fact we've already got a year under our belt of replacing
Yes.
water lines.
Amen.
And Jack and utility people, Reed Downs and his people, tireless workers all the time. We need to get them all in here sometime soon. After the first major water break, we'll have them in.
Mark just took an Excedrin migraine.
Oh, my
Yeah,
goodness.
well, I don't care. I don't care. We,
think they call
we,
that a
we never can
jinx.
say that in February. I mean, you can never can make that
We
comment.
made it through January without a major water break, and that is commendable.
And I'm not talking about global warming, but if people don't think we have a climate change, there's nothing I can say to you about it, but we do have a climate change in our world. But I think it's a combination. I want to say that on behalf of our utility people. We're replacing lines that would have already
Yes.
sprung big leaks.
yes.
I think so.
Afternoon.
Hi.
Hi, Jolene Thompson, live over on Laywood Road. I wasn't going to say anything, but I saw my chance, so I'm going to take it. I have a question for Mr. Kelly. I'm getting ready to get back into CASA. And when I was in another state, when I won't name that state, but was a CASA volunteer for about 10 years. What we did down there was when one of the policemen would have to go out and pick up a child, especially a small child, we started putting bears, teddy bears, for them to take with them. Now, I don't know what you guys are doing here, but I think that would be a marvelous program to start.
I was gonna say I can
You already
speak to
doing
that.
that? Okay. There's one other thing too. It's luggage. Some of these kids, when they, are taking older kids, they have to put everything in a stack. And is there any way that people could donate? And I know it would take up a lot of room and so forth, but luggage for these kids,
Ms.
so
Thompson,
they'd have something to put.
For Jamie's sake, the foster care agency collects luggage at their
Okay.
location.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming up.
Jolene.
Anyone else? Old business item A.
No old business.
Oh, consent agenda.
A resolution of the City of Ashland, Kentucky adopting, authorizing, and approving the course of action presented by the city manager on the items appearing on the consent agenda for the regular meeting of the Board of City Commissioners of February 13th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. No new business.
We do, prior to the motion for executive session, have some reappointments to boards and commissions that the mayor recommends to the commission for their consent and approval. To the Ashland Board of Zoning, Jack Van Hoos of 2722 Auburn Avenue, Ashland, Kentucky. The Human Rights Commission, Judy Robinson, 2650 Central Parkway, Ashland, Kentucky. Charles Botts, 2920 Ranch Road, Ashland, Kentucky. Bernice Henry, Glalo Apartments, 1101 Stella Drive, Ashland, Kentucky. Jamie Conley, 2103 Stevens Avenue, Ashland, Kentucky. And a new appointment for that commission, Faith Fountain, 611 25th Street, Ashland, Kentucky. So would entertain a motion approving the mayor's recommendation on that.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners. We need a motion to go into executive session on an individual personnel matter.
I'd like to amend that to also add a potential litigation as a discussion item.
Potential litigation. Would you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we're going to discuss two items, individual personnel and potential litigation. No other item will be discussed and no action will be taken.